Sometimes, a seemingly harmless dare can take a dark turn, and that's exactly what happened to Sam Ballard. In 2010, the 19-year-old aspiring rugby player was enjoying a chill evening with his friends at the home of Jimmy Galvin, a buddy who, believe it or not, is now a famous pianist and music composer. The group was just hanging out, sipping on red wine and trying to act a bit grown up. But then, the night took an unexpected turn when a slug appeared on the concrete patio, and, as it often does with a bunch of teenage boys, a dare was born. So, what did they do? They dared Sam to eat the slug. A totally innocent, silly moment among friends, right? What could possibly go wrong? Well, what happened next would change Sam's life forever. He gulped down the slimy creature, thinking it was just a weird, gross challenge. But soon after, he began feeling incredibly weak, with his legs in pain. Then came the dizziness, followed by vomiting. His mother, Katie Ballard, initially thought the symptoms might be a sign of multiple sclerosis, a condition that had affected her husband. Multiple sclerosis can cause fatigue, dizziness, and weakness in the legs, and Sam had all of those symptoms. But doctors quickly ruled it out. It wasn't until Sam mentioned that he had eaten a slug that the puzzle pieces started to fall into place. Katie was skeptical. Who gets sick from eating a slug? But soon, Sam's diagnosis would prove much more terrifying. He had contracted a rare parasite known as rat lungworm disease. You might be wondering what on earth rat lungworm disease is. Well, here's the scoop. It's a disease caused by a parasite typically found in rats. The parasite gets into slugs when they consume rat feces that's contaminated with the parasite. When humans eat raw or undercooked slugs, the parasite can make its way into the brain, causing severe complications. And that's exactly what happened to Sam. The parasite made its way to his brain, causing inflammation in the membranes surrounding both the brain and spinal cord. Things went downhill fast, and Sam was soon in a coma, fighting for his life. Though most cases of rat lungworm disease are mild, Sam's case was catastrophic. He remained in a coma for about 13 months. When he woke up, he found himself in a completely different world, paralyzed and barely able to speak. His rugby dreams were shattered, and now he needed help to do even the simplest tasks. Despite this devastating new reality, Sam remained fully aware of everything around him. His friend Jimmy, who had been there when the dare went down, couldn't help but feel guilty. In an emotional moment, he apologized to Sam, with tears streaming down both their faces. Sam's mom, Katie, never blamed his friends for the dare. She knew it was just a reckless moment of youth. However, the weight of what followed would weigh heavily on her forever. She hoped, against all odds, that one day Sam might walk again. But deep down, she knew his life could never go back to the way it was. In the final years of Sam's life, Katie fought tirelessly for her son's care, especially when Australian authorities cut disability funding. But despite her relentless efforts, the years of hardship wore on her. On November 2nd, 2018, Sam passed away at the age of 28 in Hornsby Hospital, just a short distance from where he grew up. In his final moments surrounded by his loved ones, Sam managed to say the words Katie had been longing to hear, "I love you." It was the last thing he ever said before taking his final breath, a sad reminder of how one dare changed everything. It began in April 2017, when a man with no past stepped onto the Appalachian Trail. He called himself Mostly Harmless, but some hikers nicknamed him Denim because of his jeans. He carried a heavy backpack, a notebook filled with mysterious computer code, and an aura of quiet detachment. Friendly but distant, he seemed to be searching for something: peace, escape, maybe even redemption. No one knew where he came from, and he offered no answers. For over a year, Mostly Harmless wandered the wilderness, surviving off the land, never using a phone, never leaving a trace. He made friends along the trail, but kept them at arm's length, as if he knew he wouldn't be around long. The Appalachian Trail was a place of solitude, a refuge for lost souls. But even here, his presence was different, deliberate, ghostly. Then, in July 2018, his journey came to a chilling end. Two hikers in Florida's Big Cypress National Preserve noticed a foul smell coming from a yellow tent. Hesitantly, they approached, their voices shaking as they called out. Silence. With growing dread, they pulled back the flap. Inside, mostly harmless, lay still, skeletal, his body withered to just 83 pounds. He had no ID, no phone, no wallet, only a notebook of indecipherable code and $3,500 in cash. The discovery sent shockwaves through the hiking community. The authorities were baffled. His fingerprints matched no records. No missing persons report fit his description. He had no tattoos, just a single abdominal scar. His cause of death? Undetermined. He had food, money, yet he had wasted away. Why? The mystery of Mostly Harmless spread online like wildfire. Hikers who had met him shared their encounters, describing a man who was kind, soft-spoken, but impossibly private. Amateur detectives scoured missing persons databases, chased leads and debated theories. Who was this man who had walked among them, only to vanish in death? For 2 years, the questions mounted. Then, in July 2020, a breakthrough. A group of online sleuths raised funds for DNA testing, leading investigators to Louisiana. Finally, a name surfaced: Vance John Rodriguez, born in 1976. But the truth was darker than anyone had imagined. Rodriguez had lived a fractured life, brilliant but troubled, withdrawn, tormented by his past. Those who knew him described a man haunted by mental struggles, prone to anger, and obsessed with coding. The scar on his abdomen, self-inflicted at 15, a wound that nearly ended his life. In 2017, he vanished, leaving behind his apartment, passport, credit cards, erasing himself. For 15 months, he wandered the trail, forming fleeting bonds but refusing to stay. One of the last people to know him was a hiker named Brandon Dow. They bonded over their broken childhoods, but when Dow suggested staying in touch, Rodriguez refused. He didn't want to be found. Now, the world knew his name, but the deeper mystery remained. Why did he choose this path? What was he running from? How does someone so connected in life end up so alone in death? For Lisa Schilling and her 12-year-old daughter, Lily Aguilar, Buckhorn Canyon wasn't just a place. It was a tradition, a sanctuary, a slice of untouched nature where the worries of city life faded away. It was where they had laughed around campfires, watched the stars from their trailer, and made countless cherished memories with their loved ones. But on July 15th, 2022, what was meant to be another peaceful getaway turned into an unthinkable tragedy. Lisa, a dedicated 4th grade teacher, was set to start a new chapter at Bear Creek Elementary. Lily, on the cusp of turning 13, was eagerly counting down the days to her birthday. Neither of them knew they had only hours left to live. That Friday afternoon, the sky darkened, and a steady rain began to fall. It didn't seem alarming at first, just another passing summer storm, but hidden in the mountains, nature was brewing a silent catastrophe. The rain triggered a deadly chain reaction. The Cameron Peak fire, which had ravaged the area 2 years earlier, had left the soil loose and unstable. Now, with every drop of rain, the mountainside weakened. Then, at 5 p.m., it happened. A thunderous, gut-wrenching roar ripped through the canyon, a sound that sent chills down the spines of everyone at the campsite. Annette Vasquez, Lisa's sister-in-law, froze in horror as she turned to see a nightmare racing toward them. A monstrous wall of water, mud, boulders, and uprooted trees came thundering down the creek. A flash flood so powerful, so merciless, that it was unstoppable. Lisa and Lily were inside their trailer when the flood hit. There was no warning, no chance to run. In mere seconds, the churning mass of destruction lifted the trailer off the ground, tossing it like a toy in its unrelenting grip. The terrified screams of mother and daughter vanished beneath the deafening roar of the flood as their home away from home was swallowed by the raging current. Onlookers could do nothing but watch in helpless terror as the trailer was ripped away, disappearing into the chaos. And just like that, Lisa and Lily were gone. The Larimer County Sheriff's Office received frantic calls about the flood around 5 p.m., but by the time rescuers arrived, the devastation was already irreversible. For 2 long hours, search teams scoured the flooded canyon, hoping, praying that Lisa and Lily had somehow survived. But as darkness began to fall, hope slipped away. At 7:30 p.m., they found them. Lisa and Lily's bodies were discovered more than half a mile away from their campsite, washed down the canyon by the relentless floodwaters. Their beloved dogs, who had been in the trailer with them, were gone too. The flood stole more than 2 lives that day. It shattered an entire family. Lisa's husband, already grieving from recent losses, was now faced with the unbearable reality that his wife and daughter were never coming home. Friends and family rushed to support him, setting up an online fundraiser to help with funeral expenses. Within days, the GoFundMe campaign had raised nearly $14,000 out of its $25,000 goal, a testament to the community's love for Lisa and Lily. But no amount of money could undo the devastation. All right, folks, buckle up because this story is equal parts bizarre and tragic, with a side of face-palm-worthy decisions. Picture this. It's Friday, January 12, 2007, and a morning radio show called The Morning Rave on KDND decides to host an on-air contest with a prize everyone wanted back then, a Nintendo Wii. Yep, the hottest gaming console of the era, worth around $250. The name of the contest? Hold Your Wii for a Wii. And yes, it's just as ridiculous as it sounds. But hey, you gotta admire the straightforwardness. Here's the deal. Contestants had to drink as much water as possible without going to the bathroom. If you've ever been stuck on a long road trip with no rest stops, you know the struggle these people were about to face. But on paper, it seemed harmless enough until it wasn't. Enter Jennifer Strange, a devoted wife, loving mom of 3, and someone just trying to win a fun gaming system for her family. What could possibly go wrong, right? The contest kicked off at 6:15 a.m. with 18 eager participants, each handed an 8-ounce bottle of water to chug every 15 minutes. At first, it seemed like a breeze. These were small half-pint bottles, after all, but after just 90 minutes and 5 bottles in, the first contestant, James Ibarra, tapped out, his bladder waving the white flag. And that's when things started getting weird. A nurse, clearly more informed than the show's hosts, called in to warn them about the dangers of water intoxication, a real and potentially deadly condition where drinking too much water dilutes vital electrolytes, causing severe health issues. You'd think this would be a huge red flag, but nope, the hosts laughed it off. One even joked, "Is anyone dying in there?" Another quipped, "They signed releases, so we're not responsible." Yikes. Meanwhile, the contestants were kept in a separate room, oblivious to the nurse's warning. Jennifer, determined to win that Wii for her kids, kept going even as the pain set in. She complained about severe discomfort and splitting headaches, but the hosts were still joking around, showing a shocking lack of understanding. When one DJ asked if water poisoning was even a thing, another replied, "Not with water. Your body's 98% water. Why can't you take in as much as you want?" A third host even joked, "Maybe we should have researched this first." Ya think? As the contest dragged on, the water bottles got bigger and the stakes higher. Jennifer pushed through nearly 2 gallons of water in just over 3 hours. Despite being in visible distress, she powered on, wanting to bring that Wii home for her 2 sons and daughter. When she finally bowed out, she was the second to last contestant standing, earning, wait for it, tickets to a Justin Timberlake concert. Not quite the prize she was aiming for, but things went from bad to catastrophic. Jennifer's stomach was painfully swollen, and she complained of excruciating headaches. Hoping some rest would help, she skipped work and went straight to bed. What she didn't know was that her body was already in crisis. Excessive water intake had diluted her blood sodium levels, causing water to flood into her cells. While most tissues can handle a little swelling, the brain, not so much. Encased in a rigid skull, her swelling brain had nowhere to go, leading to severe damage. Later that day, Jennifer called her workplace, crying and describing unbearable pain. Just 5 hours after the contest ended, her mother found her lifeless body at home. It's hard to imagine a more heartbreaking end to what was supposed to be a lighthearted event. The fallout was swift. The morning rave hosts, known on air as Trish, Maney, and Lucas, were fired the very next day. KDND canceled the show and terminated 10 employees in total. Jennifer's family sued the station, and on October 29, 2009, a California jury awarded them $16.5 million in damages. The station was held fully accountable for the reckless stunt that cost Jennifer her life. It was supposed to be a peaceful journey, a spiritual retreat deep in the Wyoming wilderness. A chance for Reverend Mike Turner, a devoted 48-year-old pastor from Caldwell, Idaho, to reconnect with his faith, away from the noise of the world. At 6 feet 6 inches, he was a towering figure, but his heart was even bigger, filled with a deep love for his family and his unshakable belief in God. His only companion on this 10-day trek? Andy, his loyal black Labrador mix. They were set to travel across the unforgiving terrain of the Continental Divide before reuniting with Mike's family for a long-awaited camping trip. But that reunion would never happen. What started as a journey of peace would soon become a desperate battle against time, the elements, and the limits of human endurance. For the first few days, everything was perfect. The Wind River Range stretched out before Mike in all its untouched beauty. He even wrote in his journal about the serenity of it all, how the silence and stillness made him feel closer to God. But the wilderness is unforgiving, and when disaster strikes, it doesn't give warnings. On August 2nd, just 4 days into the trek, things took a deadly turn. While crossing a treacherous boulder field over 11,000 feet high, Mike noticed Andy struggling. The jagged rocks had shredded the dog's paws, leaving him limping in pain. Concerned, Mike decided to take an alternate route, one that would be easier on his companion. It was a decision made out of love, but it would lead him straight into the jaws of death. As he carefully picked his way across the shifting rocks, Mike stepped onto a boulder. It wobbled beneath his weight. He tried to shift his footing. Too late, the rock gave way. In an instant, he lost control. He lunged, trying to regain balance, but his foot slipped between two massive rocks. Before he could react, the boulder he had just stepped on rolled forward and trapped his legs. At first, the shock numbed the reality of what had just happened. He struggled, clawing at the stone, trying to push it off with all his strength, but it was no use. The weight was immense. His legs were pinned. He wasn't crushed, but he was completely immobilized, and he was utterly alone. For 2 agonizing hours, Mike fought to free himself. He dug at the earth. He used every tool he had. Nothing worked. And then, the true horror of his situation set in. No one knew he had changed his route. No one was coming. With no way to call for help, his survival depended on his own resilience. He began documenting everything in his journal, a record of his final days, written with heartbreaking honesty. At first, he was hopeful. He melted snow for water, used his rainfly to collect dew, and even kept his sense of humor. In one chilling entry, he joked, "I wonder how urine will taste with crystal light." But as the days dragged on, that hope turned into something far darker. On August 5th, 4 days after becoming trapped, his journal reflected a man slipping into despair. "I feel so foolish, taking this longer path, so lonely, more than I imagined. Who would have guessed 4 days would go by and no one would come this way?" Meanwhile, back home, his wife Diane was growing frantic. Mike was supposed to be back. When he didn't arrive, she contacted authorities, triggering a massive search effort. For weeks, searchers combed the wrong trails, completely unaware that Mike was trapped, helpless, just waiting. By the end of August, all hope seemed lost. The official search had been called off. Mike was just another name on a growing list of missing hikers swallowed by the wilderness. But then, something incredible happened. On August 28th, nearly a month after Mike had set out, hikers stumbled upon Andy. The dog had somehow survived, miraculously covering miles of rugged terrain. He was weak, starving, but alive. His discovery reignited the search, but time had already run out. A hiker named Jeff Stewart would be the one to find Mike. The sight was haunting. His body was still trapped between the rocks, right where he had fallen. The journal, his last connection to the world, was tucked carefully in a plastic bag, his final words growing weaker, more uneven. And then, one last heartbreaking detail. Beside him, placed gently on a rock, was his wedding ring, a final message to the family he would never see again. Mike Turner's story is a chilling reminder of how fast things can go wrong in the wild. A simple change in route, a single misplaced step, that's all it takes. Even the strongest, most experienced hikers are at the mercy of the elements. It was supposed to be an unforgettable weekend. 4 young friends camping under the stars, surrounded by the peaceful waters of Lake Bodom. But instead of a night filled with laughter and adventure, their trip turned into one of Finland's most chilling murder mysteries. On the night of June 4th, 1960, 2 15-year-old girls, Mila Emil Björklund and Anya Tuulikki-Mäki, along with their 18-year-old boyfriends, Seppo Antero Boisman and Niels Wilhelm Gustafsson, set up camp by the lake, eager to enjoy the beauty of nature. The air was warm, the lake still, and the group was in high spirits, completely unaware of the horror that was about to unfold. Sometime between 4 and 6 a.m., as the friends lay inside their small tent, an unknown force struck with brutal precision. The attack was swift and merciless. Mila, Anya, and Seppo were stabbed and bludgeoned in the dead of night, their bodies left in a gruesome state. The only survivor, Niels Gustafsson, was found barely clinging to life, suffering from a concussion, a shattered jaw, and multiple facial fractures. But the real mystery, the tent had not been cut open from the inside. The killer had struck from the outside, attacking them through the fabric before leaving them for dead. Morning arrived, and life went on as usual around Lake Bodom. A group of young bird watchers, out exploring at sunrise, noticed the collapsed tent near the shoreline but thought nothing of it. As they walked past, they spotted a blonde-haired man quietly moving away from the site. Was it the killer? No one knew. It wasn't until 11 a.m., hours later, that a local carpenter, Risto Siren, stumbled upon the grisly crime scene and called the police. When authorities arrived, they were met with a horrific sight. Inside the blood-soaked tent, the bodies of Anja and Seppo lay lifeless. Outside, Mila's corpse had been dragged partially out of the tent, her clothes disheveled, stabbed even after death. Gustafsson, barely conscious, was found beside her, his injuries severe but not fatal. Strangely, the attacker had taken bizarre trophies. Keys to the teenagers' motorcycles had vanished, yet the bikes remained. Even more chilling, Gustafsson's shoes were missing, only to be discovered nearly half a mile away. Despite the brutality of the murders, the police investigation was a disaster from the start. Officers failed to secure the crime scene, allowing dozens of onlookers to trample through the area, contaminating evidence. By the time forensic teams arrived, crucial clues were lost forever. As the years passed, the case only grew darker. Whispers spread of a mysterious blonde man seen near the lake, a former KGB spy, some claimed. Another theory pointed to a local shopkeeper, known for his violent outbursts. Yet, no arrests were made. The Lake Bodom murders faded into legend, a cold case that haunted Finland for decades. Then, in 2004, 44 years after that fateful night, new forensic technology brought the case back to life. DNA evidence led police to an unexpected suspect, Niels Gustafsson, the lone survivor. The prosecution claimed that on the night of the attack, a drunken argument broke out between Gustafsson and Seppo Boisman. In a jealous rage, Gustafsson was beaten and humiliated by his friend, leaving him with a broken jaw. Enraged, they alleged, he snapped, murdering his friends in cold blood before injuring himself to stage the scene. The key piece of evidence? Gustafsson's shoes, found away from the campsite, were covered in the victim's blood, but not his own. The trial gripped the nation. Was he the sole survivor of a massacre, or the mastermind behind it? In October 2005, the jury reached its verdict, not guilty. The case against Gustafsson was deemed too weak, and he was acquitted, walking away a free man. The Finnish government later compensated him nearly 44,900 euros for wrongful accusation and the trauma of the trial. But to this day, the true identity of the killer remains unknown. No other suspects have ever been charged. No new evidence has emerged. Ever wonder if we're really ready to hand over the steering wheel to artificial intelligence? Well, this next story might make you pump the brakes on that idea. On a quiet night in Tempe, Arizona, on March 18, 2018, a groundbreaking experiment in self-driving tech went horribly wrong. Elaine Hertzberg, a 49-year-old woman, was wheeling her bicycle across the road when she crossed paths with an Uber vehicle traveling at 40 miles per hour. Sounds like the setup for a bad movie, right? Except this was real life, and it turned tragic fast. The Volvo SUV, tricked out with Uber's autonomous driving system, was in self-driving mode with Rafaela Vasquez, a safety driver behind the wheel. Her job? Keep an eye on the car and step in if things went haywire. Spoiler alert, things did go haywire. Here's where it gets even messier. It turns out that Rafaela was distracted, and not just "I glanced at my phone" distracted. She was streaming an episode of The Voice on her phone, yes, really, at the exact moment she was supposed to be monitoring a self-driving car. She looked down at her lap for over 5 seconds and looked up less than a second before the impact. By then, it was way too late. Meanwhile, Uber's AI brain was having an existential crisis, struggling to figure out what Elaine was: a vehicle, a bicycle, an other object? Because she wasn't near a crosswalk, the system failed to predict her path, and when the car finally decided to hit the brakes, it was 1.3 seconds before the crash, way too late to avoid tragedy. To make things worse, Uber had disabled the car's emergency braking system, putting all the responsibility on the safety driver, who, as we now know, was busy watching TV. The fallout was swift and brutal. This was the first pedestrian fatality involving a self-driving car, and the National Transportation Safety Board's investigation exposed some terrifying oversights. First, Uber's autonomous system didn't recognize jaywalkers, a huge blind spot given how often people cross outside designated areas. Second, there was insufficient training and zero oversight of safety drivers. Rafaela was working alone and distracted for most of her shift, a recipe for disaster. Third, Uber's system didn't alert safety drivers in emergencies, which meant there was no warning when things went wrong. And finally, Uber's Advanced Technologies Group had no formal safety plan, no standardized procedures, and no dedicated safety manager. Basically, they were winging it with self-driving cars. Unsurprisingly, the backlash was intense. Uber's self-driving car program in Arizona was suspended, and Rafaela faced legal consequences. She was sentenced to 3 years of supervised probation, with the charge downgraded to a misdemeanor if she completed her sentence successfully. While she bore some responsibility, the court also pointed to Uber's shocking lack of safety measures as a major contributing factor. After the accident, Uber updated its software to finally recognize jaywalkers, something you'd think would have been a basic feature from the start. So, the next time you hear someone say, "Self-driving cars are the future," maybe take a moment to wonder, are we really ready? On May 31, 2019, in the heart of Peru's Yanachaga-Chamilayan National Park, 25-year-old British backpacker Elizabeth "Lizzie" Orchard set out on a trek she had been planning for months. An environmental enthusiast with an insatiable thirst for adventure, Lizzie had been exploring South America alongside her sister, Rachel, and Rachel's boyfriend, Callum Jones. Together, they had marveled at the untouched beauty of the dense rainforest, trekking through its twisting trails and towering canopies. But Lizzie wasn't just a traveler, she was a seeker. That morning, she was determined to reach a summit that promised a breathtaking view, a challenge she refused to turn away from. As the three hiked, exhaustion crept in. Rachel and Callum, their feet blistered from days of trekking, decided to turn back. Lizzie, however, stood firm, eyes locked on the trail ahead. "It's only 20 minutes away," she assured them, brushing off their concerns. "I'll be fine." They hesitated, but in the end, they trusted her judgment. As they made their way down the path, Lizzie pressed forward alone, unaware that this decision would lead to her final moments. As the hours passed, the dense jungle swallowed the light. The sun dipped below the mountains, plunging the forest into an eerie darkness. Still, Lizzie pressed on, reaching the summit just as the last slivers of daylight vanished. The view stretched endlessly before her, a vast expanse of wilderness untouched by time. But as the stars blinked to life above her, a chilling realization set in. She had lost track of time. The trail she had so confidently navigated was now cloaked in shadows. Every direction looked the same. Instead of retracing her steps, Lizzie made a fateful decision. She remembered passing a waterfall earlier and reasoned that descending alongside it might lead her back faster. But this was no marked path. The terrain was treacherous, steep, slick with mist, and unrelenting. Still, she took her first step down. Then, in an instant, her luck ran out. A single, misplaced step. The earth crumbled beneath her. Her hands reached for something, anything, to stop the fall, but there was nothing to grasp. Gravity took hold, and she plummeted. She tumbled down the 650-foot ravine, her body crashing against jagged rocks and rushing water. The night swallowed her screams. When the forest finally fell silent again, Lizzie lay motionless at the base of the waterfall, her journey ending where she had hoped it would lead her home. Back at the hostel, Rachel and Callum waited. Hours stretched into the night. Then morning came. No Lizzie. Panic began to set in. By midday, they alerted the authorities, and the search for Lizzie Orchard began. Peruvian authorities, familiar with the ruthless terrain of the national park, launched a desperate search. 50 police officers, firefighters, and park rangers combed the jungle, hacking through dense undergrowth, calling her name into the vast silence. Lizzie's parents, Rupert and Cecilia Orchard, flew to Peru, their hearts trapped between hope and dread. The days dragged on. 6 excruciating days of searching. Then, on June 6, 2019, the search came to a devastating end. At the bottom of the ravine, near a path known as Orchid Way, search teams discovered Lizzie's lifeless body. She was still fully clothed, her injuries consistent with a fall from a great height. The jungle had taken her. Lizzie Orchard had chased adventure to the ends of the earth. She had stood on mountaintops, crossed wild rivers, and walked paths few dared to take. And in the end, it was that same fearless spirit that led her into the night, into the unknown, where the jungle whispered its final farewell. The Eastern family had looked forward to this trip for months. A peaceful retreat deep in the Boise National Forest, a break from the noise and chaos of daily life. The tall pines swayed gently, the crackling campfire cast flickering shadows, and the cool night air wrapped around their tents as they drifted off to sleep. But in the early hours of September 9th, 2023, their world shattered. At 5 a.m., while the forest was still cloaked in darkness, a loud, sickening crack echoed through the trees. It was the kind of sound that made your stomach drop before your brain could even process what it meant. Within seconds, a massive cottonwood tree, weakened by age and fire damage, came crashing down onto the tent where 8-year-old Cadence Easton and her faithful dog, Zell, lay sleeping. By the time anyone could react, it was already too late. A family friend, who had been camping nearby, was jolted awake by the sound. Rushing to the scene, he arrived just as the frantic shouts of Cadence's parents, Quinn and Natasha, filled the air. Flashlights flickered in the darkness, illuminating the horrifying sight, a tent crushed beneath the monstrous weight of the fallen tree. Emergency responders from the Elmore County Sheriff's Office arrived swiftly, but there was nothing they could do. Cadence was pronounced dead at the scene. Her loyal companion, Zell, never left her side, not even in death. The grief was unbearable. Cadence wasn't just another child. She was a ray of sunshine to those who knew her. Her family described her as endlessly curious, quick-witted, and filled with an infectious joy that could lift even the darkest moods. She had a special connection with animals, a deep love for nature, and an ability to make friends wherever she went. Her twin sister London was devastated. The two had been inseparable since birth, sharing an unspoken bond that only twins understand. And now, half of that connection was gone, taken by an act of nature so sudden, so cruel, it seemed almost impossible to comprehend. As officials surveyed the scene, they couldn't ignore the eerie truth. The tree that fell had been rotting for some time. Its weakened core, likely damaged by previous wildfires, had turned it into a silent, ticking time bomb, waiting for the perfect moment to collapse. Could this tragedy have been prevented? Were there warning signs that had gone unnoticed? The authorities launched an investigation, trying to determine whether past environmental damage had made the trees in the area unstable, putting other campers at risk. News of Cadence's passing sent shockwaves through Paul, Idaho, and beyond. In response, the devastated community rallied together. A GoFundMe page was set up to help the Easton family with funeral costs and other expenses, and within days, more than $28,000 had been raised. In the face of unimaginable loss, the Eastons found themselves surrounded by love and support, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, kindness and compassion endure. Yet, no amount of condolences or financial aid could erase the pain of what happened that night. The reality was cruel and irreversible. A family had gone into the woods seeking peace, only to leave with a wound that would never fully heal. Cadence Easton's story is a heartbreaking reminder of how fragile life can be, how, in an instant, everything can change. And as her loved ones grieve, they hold on to the memories of a little girl whose spirit burned bright, even in the face of tragedy. We've all got our guilty pleasures, hot chocolate, Netflix binges, maybe a little too much coffee, but for Natasha Harris, a 30-year-old mother of 8 from Invercargill, New Zealand, her guilty pleasure turned into a deadly obsession. Her love for Coca-Cola wasn't your typical, I need a soda with my burger kind of thing. We're talking 2 gallons of Coke every single day. From the moment she woke up to the moment she went to bed, she was never far from a glass of the fizzy stuff. And it wasn't just a craving, it was a full-blown addiction. Without her usual supply, Natasha would experience withdrawal symptoms like shaking, irritability, and restlessness. But because there were no warning labels on the bottles, her family never thought this everyday beverage could be dangerous, even as her health started to fall apart. For about 6 months before her death, Natasha's health took a serious hit. She was constantly exhausted, often nauseous and frequently vomiting in the mornings. Despite feeling extreme fatigue and a racing heartbeat, she avoided seeing doctors due to a deep fear of them. To make matters worse, her lifestyle wasn't helping. She barely ate, only having a small lunch most days, and smoked around 30 cigarettes daily. Her soda addiction even affected her teeth. They rotted so badly they had to be removed. And some of her kids were born without enamel on their teeth, likely due to her excessive soda consumption during pregnancy. And if you're wondering just how much caffeine she was putting into her system, brace yourself. A single ounce of Coke contains 2.3 milligrams of caffeine, and with Natasha consuming between 2.1 and 2.6 gallons daily, she was taking in around 800 milligrams of caffeine a day, double the safe limit for an average adult. Combine that with her poor diet and smoking habits, and her body was running on empty. On the morning of February 25, 2010, Natasha's routine started as usual, getting her kids ready for school and having her morning Coke fix. But shortly after, everything changed. She collapsed against a wall in the bathroom, struggling to breathe. Her partner, Christopher Hodkinson, called emergency services and tried desperately to revive her with CPR, but despite his efforts, Natasha passed away at home. The inquest into her death revealed cardiac arrhythmia, an irregular heartbeat, as the primary cause of death. But it didn't stop there. Doctors also suspected severe hypokalemia, a dangerous condition where potassium levels in the blood drop too low, likely due to her soda addiction. Potassium is crucial for proper muscle and nerve function, including keeping your heart beating normally. When you overload on caffeine and sugar, they drive potassium into your cells and out of your bloodstream, leaving dangerously low levels where it matters most. In the aftermath, Christopher blamed Coca-Cola for Natasha's death. believing the company should take responsibility for the health risks associated with excessive consumption of their product. But Coca-Cola denied direct responsibility, arguing that while cardiac arrhythmia was the official cause of death, there was no definitive proof that Coke alone was to blame. Still, experts pointed out the sheer volume of liquid Natasha consumed daily, 338 ounces a day, would strain anyone's body, regardless of the beverage. And let's not forget the 4,000 calories she was drinking every day just from Coke, almost double the recommended daily intake. While most people who enjoy soda in moderation don't need to worry, Natasha's story serves as a sobering reminder that even something as ordinary as a soft drink can turn deadly when taken to extremes. So maybe next time you reach for that extra can of Coke, you'll think twice, because no one wants their love of soda to take a dark and dangerous turn. It was a warm July evening in 2001, deep in the heart of Australia's Northern Territory. The vast outback stretched endlessly in every direction, bathed in the eerie glow of twilight. This was a land of extremes, breathtaking beauty, but also isolation so profound it could swallow a person whole. Peter Falconio, a 28-year-old British backpacker, had set off on what was supposed to be the adventure of a lifetime. Alongside his girlfriend, Joanne Lees, he had spent months exploring Australia's rugged landscapes in their orange Volkswagen Combi van. They were young, in love, and full of life, blissfully unaware that a predator was lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Somewhere along the lonely stretch of the Stewart Highway, a pair of headlights appeared in their rearview mirror. A vehicle was closing in fast. The driver, later identified as Bradley John Murdoch, a seasoned drug runner with a violent past, signaled for them to pull over. He claimed sparks were flying from their van. Peter, unaware that he had just stepped into a trap, pulled over and got out to investigate. Then, a gunshot rang out. Joanne, still inside the van, heard the deafening crack of the bullet. Then, silence. She waited, heart pounding, but Peter never returned. Instead, the man who had flagged them down now stood in the doorway of the van. He wasn't there to help. His eyes were cold, predatory, and she was next. Murdoch lunged at her, grabbing her with brutal force. Before she could scream, he bound her hands with cable ties and shoved her into his vehicle. Joanne knew at that moment Peter was gone, and if she didn't escape, she would be too. As the van idled under the night sky, Murdoch turned his attention away for just a moment, perhaps disposing of Peter's body, perhaps retrieving something sinister from his truck. It was the opening she needed. With every ounce of strength, Joanne wrenched free from her restraints and ran. Barefoot, disoriented and terrified, she sprinted into the darkness, diving into the low scrub. She didn't dare breathe, didn't dare move. Somewhere behind her she could hear Murdoch searching. She was certain he would find her. But then, nothing. Hours passed. She remained hidden, frozen in terror, until finally, headlights appeared in the distance. A passing truck, a chance at survival. She ran into the road, waving frantically. The driver, seeing the sheer desperation in her eyes, stopped and pulled her to safety. Together, they drove to a roadhouse in Barrow Creek, where she finally collapsed into the arms of the police officers. But by the time authorities reached the scene, Murdoch was already gone, vanishing into the endless outback. And with him, Peter Falconio. The crime scene offered chilling clues. A small pool of blood, Peter's, was found near the van. His body, however, was nowhere to be found. Despite relentless searches, there was no sign of him, no footprints, no drag marks, nothing. For 4 years, it was as if he had vanished into thin air. Then, in 2005, a breakthrough. Forensic experts uncovered DNA on Joanne's torn t-shirt. The match? Bradley John Murdoch. With this damning evidence, authorities tracked him down and arrested him. He denied everything, smirked in the courtroom. But Joanne's testimony was unshakable. The jury listened as she relived every agonizing moment of that night. The terror, the struggle, the escape. By December of 2005, justice was served. Murdoch was convicted of Peter Falconio's murder and Joanne's abduction. He was sentenced to life in prison. Yet, even behind bars, he carried one final secret. On the night of August 17, 1980, the vast ancient lands of Uluru in Australia's Northern Territory lay silent under the moonlight. But that silence was about to be shattered forever. The Chamberlain family, Lindy, Michael, and their 3 children, had set up camp near the towering monolith, unaware that within hours, their lives would descend into a nightmare of unimaginable horror and relentless injustice. 9-week-old Azaria Chantal Lauren Chamberlain had been peacefully sleeping in the family tent when, suddenly, a scream pierced the still night. Lindy rushed to the tent, her heart pounding, only to be met with a sight that would haunt her forever. A dingo slinking away into the darkness. The unthinkable had happened. "A dingo's got my baby!" she cried, her voice trembling with terror. But the nightmare was only just beginning. 3 separate witnesses would later confirm hearing a baby's desperate cries that night. Dingo tracks were found leading to and from the tent, their imprints pressed into the sandy earth. Bloodstains, Azaria's, covered the tent's mattress, her carry basket, and the ground where she had been sleeping. The signs were clear. A dingo had taken the infant. Indigenous and white trackers followed the trail, discovering drag marks in the sand and shallow indentations, suggesting the dingo had briefly rested. Near these imprints were dark patches that would later be suspected to be blood. Yet, from the very beginning, whispers of doubt and suspicion began to swirl. The idea of a dingo attacking a baby was met with skepticism by police, by the media, by the public. Despite the initial inquest concluding that a wild animal had indeed taken Azaria, some officers were determined to prove otherwise. They dismissed the evidence and instead turned their focus onto the Chamberlains themselves, convinced that the grieving parents, Lindy in particular, were hiding something sinister. 8 months later, a nationwide police operation was launched. The Chamberlains' home was ransacked, their belongings seized. Witnesses who had previously spoken about the dingo attack were reinterrogated, pressured to change their statements. Investigators ignored anything that pointed to the dingo, instead crafting a narrative that was more sensational, more sinister. The second inquest, rather than clarifying events, took a shocking turn. Instead of reaffirming the initial findings, authorities threw the Chamberlains under suspicion, ultimately charging Lindy with murder and Michael as an accessory. It seemed absurd. How could a mother, whose baby had been snatched from her tent, now be accused of killing her own child? But the media had already convicted her in the court of public opinion. The trial began on February 13, 1982, and quickly turned into a spectacle. The prosecution claimed Lindy had slit Azaria's throat in the family car and hidden her body in a camera case, an accusation built on dubious forensic evidence. They pointed to traces of what they claimed was fetal hemoglobin found in the Chamberlains' vehicle, later revealed to be nothing more than chemical residue from soundproofing material. The defense presented eyewitnesses, expert testimonies, and logical explanations, but it didn't matter. The court had already made up its mind. On October 29, 1982, Lindy Chamberlain was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison. Michael Chamberlain was convicted as an accessory and received a suspended sentence. Their children, Aidan and Reagan, were left without a mother, their family torn apart by a web of lies and injustice. For years, Lindy sat behind bars, condemned for a crime she did not commit. The Chamberlains' appeals were repeatedly denied, their cries for justice falling on deaf ears. But fate was not finished with this story. In 1986, a miracle emerged from the very land that had swallowed Azaria whole. Her torn and blood-stained jacket, one the prosecution claimed never existed, was discovered near a dingo den, buried in the rugged terrain. With this damning revelation, the walls of deception began to crumble. Lindy was released from prison on September 15, 1988, and 2 years later, her conviction was overturned. Yet, the battle was far from over. In 1995, a third investigation still failed to clear Azaria's cause of death. The Chamberlains continued to fight, determined to have the truth recognized. Finally, on June 12, 2012, over 3 decades after that fateful night, Coroner Elizabeth Morris officially ruled that Azaria Chamberlain had been taken and killed by a dingo, a tragic yet long overdue confirmation of what Lindy had said all along. Though Lindy received $1.3 million in compensation for wrongful imprisonment, no amount of money could erase the torment, the shattered reputation, the years lost. What should have been a case of tragic misfortune had turned into one of Australia's most infamous miscarriages of justice. Some stories sound so bizarre they're hard to wrap your head around, and this is definitely one of them. Meet Darren Hickey, a 51-year-old British wedding planner from Bolton, Lancashire, who was known for his big personality and even bigger heart. Not only was he a pro at planning dream weddings, but he was also deeply dedicated to charity. But Darren wasn't just about work. His incredible resilience made him an inspiration. 7 years earlier, he'd survived a massive stroke that left him with difficulty walking and speaking, but he didn't let that stop him. His determination earned him the Inspirational Person of Courage Award from the Stroke Association. You'd think after overcoming so much, Darren would have faced down just about anything, but no one could have predicted how a simple fish cake would change everything. It all started on April 4th, 2019, when Darren attended a wedding venue in Lancashire. At some point around noon, he sampled a small fish cake. Totally normal, right? But here's where things took a turn. That little bite of fish cake was scalding hot, and it burned the back of his throat. Now, we've all burnt our tongues on pizza or soup before, no big deal, and Darren thought the same. But as the day went on, that minor burn started feeling less minor. The pain grew worse, so Darren decided to get it checked out. He went to the urgent care ward at Chorley Hospital, where doctors assessed him and sent him home with paracetamol and the usual advice to come back if things got worse. Trusting the doctors, Darren went home to rest, assuming the worst was behind him. But the worst was just beginning. Over the next 12 hours, that burn turned into something far more dangerous than anyone could have expected. The swelling in Darren's throat increased rapidly, and by that evening his condition took a terrifying turn. His partner, Neil Parkinson, heard distressing noises and rushed to find Darren standing, choking and gasping for air. Neil tried desperately to help, and paramedics arrived quickly, but it was too late. Just after midnight, Darren was pronounced dead at Royal Bolton Hospital. A man who had survived a stroke and fought his way back to health was taken down by a single bite of hot fish cake. And if that's not chilling, I don't know what is. The inquest at Bolton Coroner's Court revealed the terrifying cause of Darren's death: extensive throat swelling leading to suffocation, and we're not talking a little irritation. The burn was so severe that it blocked his airway, depriving his body of oxygen. Pathologist Dr. Patrick W. explained that the burn was spot only visible with specialized equipment. He even compared the injury to burns seen in people who inhale smoke during house fires. And it all started with one small bite of hot fish cake. While these cases are incredibly rare, it makes you think twice about those times you've burnt your tongue on hot pizza, because sometimes what seems like a simple mistake can turn into something far more dangerous. August 23, 2016. A quiet night in Home Hill, Queensland, Australia. The backpackers staying at Shelley's hostel were winding down after a long day of farm work. Conversations were soft, laughter occasional, as exhaustion from the day settled over the travelers. Among them was Mia Eilif Chung, a bright and adventurous 21-year-old from Derbyshire, and Thomas Jackson, a compassionate 30-year-old from Cheshire who had spent years traveling, teaching, and helping others. Neither of them knew that, before the night was over, they would come face to face with a nightmare. Somewhere in the hostel, Smail Ayad, a 29-year-old French backpacker, was descending into madness. Under the influence of cannabis and gripped by psychosis, his mind had spiraled into something dark, something violent. Then, at 11:15 p.m., the terror began. Without warning, Ayad lunged at Mia. The knife flashed under the dim hostel lights as he stabbed her repeatedly, his rage unleashed in a savage flurry of violence. Screams echoed through the building as Mia, bloodied and in agony, somehow managed to escape. She staggered to a bathroom, slammed the door shut, and locked herself inside. Her hands trembled as she pressed them against her wounds, trying desperately to stop the bleeding, but she was running out of time. Daniel Richards, another backpacker, heard the chaos and ran toward the bathroom. What he saw would haunt him forever. Mia, slumped against the wall, covered in blood, her eyes wide with terror. Without hesitation, he raised the alarm. The cries for help rang through the hostel, shattering the silence of the outback night. And that was when Thomas Jackson heard them. Thomas didn't hesitate. Rushing toward the bathroom, he found Mia and immediately realized the horror of the situation. She was bleeding out. She needed help. He stayed with her, trying to comfort her, trying to shield her. But the true nightmare was still unfolding. Ayad, still gripping his blood-stained knife, returned. Moments earlier, in a bizarre, delirious episode, he had leaped from a balcony, convinced he could fly. But now, his eyes burned with something else, a relentless, unchecked rage. Thomas, thinking for a moment that Ayad might need help, stepped toward him. It was the kind of person Thomas was, selfless, kind, always willing to help someone in distress. But in that instant, kindness became a fatal mistake. Ayad's face twisted in fury as he charged at Thomas, knife raised. There was no time to react. He stabbed Thomas once, twice, again and again, 12 times. The final, devastating blow was to his brain. Blood pooled on the hostel floor. The man who had rushed in to save a life was now losing his own. Mia was still alive, but barely. The hostel had turned into a war zone. Ayad's screams filled the air. Delusional, violent, incoherent. He was yelling at the top of his lungs, "Allahu Akbar," though later, authorities would confirm that this wasn't terrorism. This was madness. The police arrived, guns drawn, orders shouted. Ayad was taken down, but the damage had already been done. Mia was pronounced dead at the scene. Thomas was still breathing. Rushed to Townsville Hospital, Thomas was placed on life support. His family, thousands of miles away in England, prayed for a miracle. His mother, father, and sister clung to hope that somehow, some way, he would survive. But after 6 agonizing days, on August 30th, 2016, Thomas took his final breath. The man who had thrown himself between a madman and his victim, the man who had chosen courage over fear, kindness over self-preservation, was gone. The tragedy rocked Australia. 2 young lives stolen. A horrific, senseless act of violence that defied understanding. Investigations revealed Ayad's state of psychosis, the cannabis in his system, his unraveling mind. In 2020, a Queensland coroner's report confirmed that Ayad was legally insane at the time of the killings. Criminal charges were dropped. There would be no trial, no justice, only grief. Thomas's parents, Leslie and Sandra, were shattered. "We think about him all the time," Leslie said, his voice heavy with sorrow. Sandra's words were even more heartbreaking. "I'll never get over it. You just learn to live with it." His sister, Liv, took to Facebook to share her devastation, but in her grief, she made a plea. Remember Thomas not as a victim, but as a friend who brought joy and kindness to the world. The world did not forget Thomas Jackson. In the years that followed, his bravery was recognized with one of the highest awards for heroism, the Queen's Gallantry Medal. His mother accepted the medal on his behalf from Prince William at Buckingham Palace. In Queensland, his sacrifice was honored. His name is remembered, his story is told, but none of it can change the reality of what happened. Trevor Holminski was a 20-year-old with an unbreakable bond with nature. The wilderness wasn't just a passion for him, it was his way of life. His documentary, A Blue Crow, captured his survival skills and deep respect for the wild. And soon, he was set to embark on his next great adventure, joining the Marines. But before taking that step, he craved one last escape into the outdoors, a final taste of the untamed world he loved. So, in August 2015, he and his friend Sheldon Stewart set out for Bucks Lake in Northern California, unaware that this journey would end in blood and fire. Trevor's mother, Allison, recalled the excitement in his voice when he talked about the trip. He had no idea he was walking into his own nightmare. The lake shimmered under the setting sun as Trevor and Sheldon pitched their tent. The air was crisp, the forest alive with the rustling of leaves and distant calls of wildlife. But as the night fell, something changed. The two had taken LSD and marijuana, and as the drugs took hold, their reality blurred into something dark and chaotic. What happened next remains shrouded in mystery, but one thing is certain. By morning, one of them would be dead. In the early hours of August 22, 2015, firefighters responded to a raging brush fire near Bucks Lake. As they fought to contain the flames, they stumbled upon something chilling. Near the smoldering remains of a campsite, they found a man, Sheldon Stewart, his neck covered in deep stab wounds. But that wasn't the most horrifying discovery. Just feet away, within the fire pit, lay a burned body. Smoke still curled from the charred remains, the air thick with the sickening stench of scorched flesh. It was Trevor. Investigators arrived at the grisly scene and immediately sensed that something sinister had taken place. When they questioned Sheldon, his story was disjointed, riddled with inconsistencies. He claimed Trevor had attacked him, forcing him to defend himself, but the evidence whispered a different tale, one of calculated violence, betrayal, and an attempted cover-up. The autopsy revealed the brutal truth. Trevor had been stabbed multiple times before being set on fire. His body bore no signs of a struggle, no defensive wounds. The scene suggested something far more disturbing than a mere fight gone wrong. Investigators scoured the area and soon uncovered damning evidence. Trevor's wallet and ID buried near the campsite, alongside the very knife used to kill him. And then there was Sheldon's own wounds, shallow cuts that medical experts determined were likely self-inflicted. The noose tightened around Sheldon as detectives pressed him for answers. His version of events kept shifting. First, he insisted he acted in self-defense. Then, he claimed Trevor had made unwanted advances. But with each revision of his story, he only sank deeper into suspicion. Finally, the trial began, and Sheldon's fate was left in the hands of a jury. His defense tried to argue that the drugs had warped his perception, that he had only lashed out in fear, but the prosecution tore through those claims. They painted a picture of a man who, under the influence, had committed an unspeakable act and tried to erase the evidence in flames. Then came the final, chilling confession. Sheldon admitted that Trevor had asked him to end his misery. The meaning of those words remains unclear, a cryptic message lost to the chaos of that night. But the jury had heard enough. The verdict? Guilty. First-degree murder, arson. Sheldon Stewart was sentenced to 26 years to life, his fate sealed in the very courtroom where justice for Trevor was finally served. But for Trevor's family, the pain never faded. A mother's grief, a life stolen too soon, a promising future reduced to ashes in a campfire pit. One final adventure, one final betrayal, and a truth that still haunts the woods of Bucks Lake to this day.